Mr. Mahdev, Mohan.
Sir, I used to believe that if most of my friends are speaking about something, it's likely, more than likely to be true. If you apply this presumption to the internet, it's basically that if something goes viral, that news must have veracity. I've changed my presumption, sir. The old presumption that if people are all talking about something or sharing some information via the internet that is going to be true is now the reverse presumption. That is likely something you have to look at very carefully. Weaponized in this way, deliberate online falsehoods or misinformation can sow societal discord. As has been observed in the Green Paper, by the ministers, and in various jurisdictions. Fake news also risks, importantly, devaluing and delegitimizing the voices of expertise and the concept of objective data, which undermines society's ability to engage in a rational discourse based upon shared facts. As an academic, this importance of objective data is extremely important. And in the course of this speech, I'd like to point this House to what's going on in the universities as far as fake news is concerned. I support the motion to convene a select committee, sir, to address this problem, as well as the ministry's recognition in the Green Paper that this problem requires a multi-stakeholder response, not just from the government, not just from a whole-of-government approach, but it has to be a whole-of-Singapore approach. The select committee, in my view, sir, should consider 4 points, as I will set out in this speech. First, how do we define what is or what is not fake news? 2, how do we utilize the government's existing toolbox of soft measures as well as hard laws to combat fake news? 3, how do we equip users of the internet, most of Singaporeans, to be the first line of defense against online falsehoods? And finally, how could we involve major internet platforms or ICT companies in our efforts to combat this problem? Looking at the definition as the first point, it's important to clarify and for the select committee to look into this point as to what the term fake news or deliberate online falsehoods really means and to frame the problem that we are seeking to tackle. That phrase fake news, for a variety of reasons and for a variety of people, is a loaded term capable of being co-opted by different constituents across the world for different purposes. I note that the NTU, specifically professors from NTU, 3 professors, have directed their minds to the problem of what is fake news. In an article that they published in August, they note that they undertook an examination of 34 scholarly articles and looked at a duration between 2003 to 2017 in order to map the different conceptions of fake news. They've gone on to say that fake news has 2 elements. The first, obviously, would be whether or not there is veracity or facticity in their view. And secondly, the intention behind the news, the degree to which the author of the fake news intends to deceive. The most recent understandings of fake news or online falsehoods focuses on pieces of news that are low in veracity and high in intention to mislead. This would be the most dangerous elements of fake news or online falsehoods. When looking at this definition, it's important also to see what it would exclude. So as an example, fictitious news stories with a vague plausibility, but which are aimed at humor, should be excluded if they are deliberately satirical and that they caveat that that's their purpose. It's different. If there's innocent, inadvertent inaccuracies or mistakes, as some have spoken to earlier, that should be excluded. And finally, impassioned opinion or commentary that is based on facts, even if people would disagree with these facts, that should be excluded. Ultimately, it's important for the select committee to give us the parameters of what is fake news that we'd be looking at. Secondly, looking at the regulatory toolbox that is currently available for government. Our government agencies, sir, indeed hold significant power and sometimes could impose major sanctions if they choose to do so in relation to data authenticity, privacy, security, and they must always be subject to certain constraints in the public interest. The Select Committee should outline and recommend how a smart nation in the 21st century should responsibly enforce existing laws. There is a considerable range in this toolbox that regulators have. It ranges from inspection, support, advice, and it can be backed up by criminal, civil, and reputational sanctions. Preemptive measures, which is what the Select Committee would be thinking about, should be the main focus of the legal solutions that we are putting together, as false information and fake news can inflict lasting damage long after it has first been disseminated, even if this news is subsequently disproved. Where damage or harm is caused, appropriate remedies are currently available, as some members have spoken about, in the Defamation Act, the Sedition Act, the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, and various steep fines that the IMDA can impose. Beyond what currently exists, the Select Committee should be thinking about what is necessary to be part of the arsenal that currently is not there, but that should be there because it's necessary to be there. Third, how do we equip internet users, regular Singaporeans, to be that first line of defense? According to a research paper by the IT security company Trend Micro in May last year, Trend Micro said this: in a post-truth era, news is easy to manufacture but challenging to verify. It's essentially up to the users to better discern the veracity of the stories that they read and prevent fake news from further proliferating. I would therefore agree with the members who have spoken before me to talk about the importance of discerning truth from fake news. It's far more difficult than we would think. As a very simple example, those of us who follow football can understand that if you have a WhatsApp chat group, there is information on your sports teams, on the players that you support, and what you think should be changed. Should the managers be doing something different? Should a new player be acquired? And very often, fake news is actually propagated on these WhatsApp chat groups. 2 points come up. What happens because of this? People are upset, but how far is that damage? So I wouldn't look at that particular example as something that we should come up with a very strong enforcement measure against. How much of this is fake news and what's the damage of that fake news is also something we should look at. There is a need to appreciate the difference in the way people of different ages, social backgrounds, and genders use and respond to fake news. Some groups, sir, are more vulnerable than others. Enhancing digital literacy amongst vulnerable segments of society should also be part of the solution, namely the elderly and the youth who are given false information may benefit from the truth. Outreach to the elderly could be done through community ambassadors and role models who vet these WhatsApp messages that are sent that could alarm them. Online deliberate faced falsehoods, sir, in my opinion, are a poison. The same network benefits that false news has benefited from, or the same networks that false news has benefited from, could also be applied as an antidote to this poison. A network, sir, of fact checkers, as many of us have spoken about, could perhaps be set up. Fact checkers who are perhaps journalists, university students, scholars, to look into this information before it's widely disseminated, or to constantly correct misinformation as it happens. Campaigns should be launched to raise awareness on the scourge of misinformation and to equip these fact checkers with the tools needed to combat falsehoods. Media outlets should consider including critical coverage of disinformation, just to explain that this is not the case and to set the record straight. These networks can be state-driven, such as the local government website Factually, which is set up in the UK, which is a fact-checking website set up by the British Parliament, as well as another website in the US set up for the same purpose. Perhaps we could look at having a repository of information that is truthful when fake news is actually propagated on a wide scale. Finally, sir, we should look to involve major internet platforms and ICT providers. Major internet platforms should support the research and development of appropriate technological solutions to disinformation and propaganda which users may apply on a voluntary basis. They should cooperate with initiatives that offer fact-checking services to users and review their advertising models to ensure that they do not adversely impact the diversity of opinions that users can hold. It is important not to put the entire burden of policing these platforms on the people and the users who are using them. As one example, what I would say is I look to a colleague at the Singapore Management University, Professor Warren Chick, who has come out to say, and written in the Law Gazette, that it may be appropriate not always to have new legislation. So yes, have some soft laws, have guidelines, have best practices, but should we go straight into legislation? And Professor Chick says that it would be important to clarify that the relevant internet intermediaries hosting or providing access to information come under an ambit of existing regulations overseen by the IMDA. He has said that making it clear that the regime covers new aggregators, social media platforms that provide news feeds, and other similar content hosts or sources will have the effect of ensuring compliance with combating deliberate online falsehoods and allow concomitant amendments to the regulations to include specific conditions for operation. His question, I guess, would be, do we really need a new piece of legislation? I think the Select Committee should look into this question very carefully. What are the benefits of legislation on this particular point? And if there is going to be legislation, will there be aspects of that legislation which are not just hard-coding new crimes, but are giving support to the vulnerable and the youth to raise awareness against fake news? Finally, sir, it is important to start with more transparency between the internet platforms and the public, because we do not even understand often how they are moderating their content, how the algorithms are being used, and showing up on people's news feeds. The question, therefore, for the Select Committee is technological design currently being harnessed to promote more credible content or present content in a way that fosters consumer skepticism and critical analysis? If not, something needs to change. Sir, Mr. Sia before me said compellingly that perhaps we are approaching winter. And this winter, I'm not talking about seasons, but of course the winter from the Game of Thrones, that winter is coming. But I think what we should do is to say, well, if there is winter coming, how do we insulate ourselves and get the most thickest coats, the best protection from this winter? Because the usage of the internet is not going to stop, it's only going to increase. Thank you, sir.